their lordships. They can chant the devotional bhajan, Jai Radha Madhava. And if someone is new here, is anybody coming for the first time? Yeah, welcome. What is your name?
Matt.
Matt, welcome. I don't know, do we have any words, like, do we have any, like a song sheet or something?
I do in the car, I can go get it.
But otherwise, it's quite simple. I'll sing, and then they repeat what I've said. We go back and forth, so I'm trying to pick up on it, but don't worry about mispronouncing. Just join in. Is this from somebody's yard? Wow, beautiful. Okay.
Devi.
Paramahansa Paramahansa Acharya, His Divine Grace, Dasi Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Premsako Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Sri Gadadhar Srivas and Gaur Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shama Sundar Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Srimati Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Vrinda Mai Ki Jai. Sri Gangi Yamuna Saraswati Ki Jai. Sri Navadiptam Sri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Sri Jagannath Puri Nivachala Kshetra Ki Jai. Sri Mathura Dham Sri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Sri Sacramento Yatra Ki Jai. Sri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Sri Holy Name Mahamantra Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Bol. All glories to the Assam devotees. All glories to the Assam devotees. All glories to the Assam devotees. All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. I'm very happy to be here with all of you this evening. This is the town I grew up in, and all the time I was growing up, I couldn't wait to get the heck out of this town. It's like that was my goal in life, get out of Sacramento. And on my 18th birthday, I left home and I told my parents goodbye, I'm not coming back. And actually I didn't come back until about that was in 63, when I came back in about 1998 or something, 99 for a brief visit. But I didn't meet any devotees, so that was not so nice. And then last year when I came, then I met all of you, so then it made Sacramento a much more appealing place. And thank you all for being here and serving Srila Prabhupada. So, what I thought that I would like to discuss today are the unparalleled achievements of Srila Prabhupada. Sort of like a brief summary. I say brief because if we went into details, we would be here for a very long time. So this is a brief summary, like an overview of his miraculous accomplishments beginning from 65 to 67. We're not even going before that, because actually everything began, before he even arrived. The seeds were being planted and he was preparing. There's some kind of reverb, so maybe you get that? Hello? That? Maybe turn it down a tiny bit. So I think probably, with the exception of Matt, who's a new kid on the block here, everybody is familiar with the arrival of Srila Prabhupada in America in 65. So just for a little explanation to Matt, that the person we're talking about is the founder of the Hare Krishna movement. And he's very dear to all of us because by his wonderful success, we have all been given a very exemplary lifestyle and an opportunity to perfect the human form of life and go back to Godhead. So there's a small picture right here that is Srila Prabhupada, and so this is who we'll be discussing here. He came here on the order of his spiritual master. In other words, it's not like one day he woke up and thought, I'd like to go to America, And he was definitely not coming as a tourist. He came at the age of, he left India at the age of 69 plus. And nowadays we go back and forth quite freely from India. I just came back last week, and we're jump on a plane and back and forth. He did not jump on a plane. He climbed up a gangplank to a cargo ship and crossed the ocean. So during that crossing on this cargo ship, he observed his 70th birthday. And during the crossing, he also experienced 2 heart attacks. And there was no infirmary on the boat. There was probably some kind of medical officer, but certainly not a doctor, which would be someone who could treat a heart attack. So he was there with the holy name, and eventually Lord Krishna personally appeared to him and assured him that he would safely guide him across the ocean. So when he arrived here, now we go, we have our little credit cards, we have, we may not have money in the pocket, but we have, there's, and I was explaining to somebody that I met when I came first to San Diego. So the person saying, where are you going? And I'm going to San Diego, then I'm going here and there, and oh, what are you doing? What hotel are you staying at? And I laughed because I never stay at hotels. I'm always with devotees. Because of Srila Prabhupada's wonderful arrangement to spread Krishna consciousness, everywhere we go in the world, there's a member of the Hare Krishna family. And we like to stay together, so there's always a welcome door in every port of call. But he didn't have that when he arrived in America, just alone. And he had the equivalent of $7 to his name. It was like 40 rupees. And in those days, you couldn't exchange rupees outside of India. And the exchange rate being what it was at that point was $7, which it was useless. He couldn't even get $7 for those 40 rupees. Actually, what happened when he went back from India after that first trip, he used that money to pay for the taxi from the airport to Vrindavan. Looking back, we should have confiscated it and saved it as a, But anyway, so one of the first things Srila Prabhupada did, besides immediately starting to preach in whatever circumstance, and it wasn't easy, it wasn't like he had an audience waiting for him. Nobody knew who was this elderly gentleman wearing strange clothes, orangish robes. Nobody knew him, he didn't know anybody. So one of the first things he did, though, was to establish ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. This was in '66. He came September '65. And then in July about of '66, ISKCON was incorporated. There were a few people he had met, nobody who you could, not anybody too extremely serious at that point, but interested enough to assist him. So in establishing ISKCON, he wrote seven points. These seven purposes you called, the 7 purposes of ISKCON. Nowadays you might say this was the mission statement, to use a modern language. So, how many of you are familiar with the 7 purposes of ISKCON? Nobody in this room?
Not all.
Yeah. And this is actually very important, fundamental, that you're gathering together under Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON umbrella. And so why are we doing this? Of course we want to assist in Lord Chaitanya's movement. The Prabhupada gave a precise roadmap that we can follow to explain why we're doing what we do and how to do it. So I want to just mention these right now. So the first one was to systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large and to educate all people in the techniques of spiritual life in order to check the imbalances of values in life and to achieve real unity and peace in the world. So he was thinking big. He wasn't just thinking in a small way. Society at large, to propagate and inform them. And he wanted to educate all people in the techniques of spiritual life. Just like now, we were chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So this is a vital technique in achieving God consciousness, chanting of the holy names. And he wasn't
thinking just the people who are going to be Hare Krishnas, just the Hindus, all people. And why? Because he wanted to check the imbalances of values of life. Can anybody in this room say that, you know, they don't see around them imbalances of values? You know, that we see such craziness in this world. People do not know how to behave. People are killing each other right, left, and center, even among family members. You know, there's just such scarcity of peace. And happiness is just an imagination in most people's minds. So by check, this is an imbalance. So he wants to check the imbalances of the values in life to achieve real unity and peace in the world. Because if there's an imbalance, how can there be peace? How can there be unity? You're always scrambling to try to get yourself situated when you're imbalanced. You know, that means you're not in a comfortable condition. But the second is to propagate a consciousness of Krishna as it is revealed in the scriptures of India, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So when Srila Prabhupada put this second point, to propagate a consciousness of Krishna, one of the young men who was assisting him at that time, he said, Swamiji, maybe you should just say God. You know, people don't know Krishna. Maybe you should say God, you know, consciousness of God. And Prabhupada said, God is Krishna. And he insisted on using Krishna's name, God as a person. Third one was to bring the members of the society together with each other, as we are here today, to bring the members of the society together with each other and nearer to Krishna, the prime entity, thus developing the idea within the members and humanity at large. Developing the idea that each soul is part and parcel of the Godhead, Krishna. So in this one, we see he's concerned now, humanity at large, but also the members of his society. That each should understand that the soul is part and parcel of the quality of Godhead, Krishna. To teach and encourage the Sankirtan movement, congregational chanting of the holy name of God, as revealed in the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we can say, at that point in time in the world, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's name was not known. The Sankirtan movement was not known. And yet this is the prime benedictor for humanity at large in Kali Yuga. And Srila Prabhupada made sure that this would be a clear part of the mission statement, that this is our business to propagate the Sankirtan movement as revealed in the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Number 5 was to erect for members and for society at large a holy place of transcendental pastimes dedicated to the personality of Krishna. So what's so wonderful about this is that he wrote in the singular, but it has manifested in the plural all over the world. Each and every ISKCON center is dedicated to the personality of Krishna, and by the chanting of the holy names and the discussion of Krishna Katha, these places become holy places of pilgrimage. And of course we have certain places like Sridham Mayapur and Krishna Balaram Mandir temple, the Juhu temple, even the Vrindavan, that are known all over the world. People come to these places specifically. Number 6 is to bring the members closer together for the purpose of teaching a simpler, more natural way of life. This is one really to meditate on nowadays, to bring members together for the purpose of teaching a simpler, more natural way of life. because I think it's fair to say our lives have become extraordinarily complicated. Even for simple living people, there's so many things we have to put our attention to. And sometimes it's such a distraction. But we need to remember that our goal is to simplify in the name of the Lord. And then 7, with a view towards achieving the aforementioned purposes, in other words, in order to achieve 1 through 6, to publish and distribute periodicals, magazine, books, and other writings. I'll speak a little bit more about that as I progress. But this has always been a backbone of the Hare Krishna movement, as the books that Srila Prabhupada has so kindly and mercifully translated for us. And not only the books of Srila Prabhupada encouraged all of his students to write their realizations and print books also. One time when we were in Mayapur, we went to the Gaudiya Math temple, where the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And there was only the books of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And Prabhupada was looking and he said, the preaching is dead. So many disciples and no one is writing and publishing books. So in other words, while the books of the founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada are our primary backbone, without gaining realizations and without his students elucidating further, then the preaching will not continue. He said, and he described, he said, the preaching is dead. So we have seen in our Krishna consciousness movement that so many of Srila Prabhupada's advanced followers have been engaged in translating further editions of different literature from the Goswamis. They have written their own books and they're being published and distributed. And each and every case, this is an extension of Srila Prabhupada's glory and accomplishments. Because were it not for him, they wouldn't be doing this. So those are the 7 purposes of ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And when he founded, as I said, just a small group, there weren't any initiated disciples at that point. And this was after a little under a year, 9, of struggling alone in New York City. But it marked the only time in history that a Krishna devotee had actually established a clearly identifiable mission for Krishna consciousness outside of India and was strictly teaching the disciplines of practicing Krishna consciousness. And even more amazing that this was happening right in the face of the counterculture movement that was going on at the time in America, where the whole mood was one of just gross material sense gratification. Actually, Prabhupada said it when he first arrived. He was prepared to just, if he thought, if they'll just chant, he wasn't even going to, impose anything. He thought, okay, they're just addicted hopelessly to eating meat and drinking. He won't just get them to chant, But by Krishna's mercy, by his purity, we were inspired to do much more. Then he sent his followers chanting the names of God into the streets in cities and towns everywhere. In other words, he really began the Sankirtan movement, Harinam Sankirtan, as Lord Chaitanya also practiced, going out into the streets. Of course, he himself personally was going to Tompkins Square Park, a park that's in the Lower East Side of New York, sitting under a tree. You can say that the Hare Krishna movement took birth under a tree in this park, because he had no followers at that time, so he would sit there with these little hand drums, not even a mridanga like we have now, and by himself chant. And then if somebody would come up, he would encourage them. He would nod his head and just, encourage them to join, chant. If you see those early pictures, you'll see all kinds of people. It's a very colorful ethnic mix of people on the Lower East Side. And at that point, particularly a lot of Eastern Europeans from Poland and Russia and different places like that, and just, so you see all these, ladies with their little babushkas, their headscarves looking, and then there were the very ethnic Jews, the Orthodox with their little, hats and their curlies. So they were there, and just, all types, and then the hippie types. But everybody, when you look at the pictures, you just see them, transfixed, looking. And then sometimes there's a few little old movie snaps, and you'll see even these people, they were open to chanting. So in that place, underneath this tree, there's a plaque on that tree that mentions that this is a tree that gave birth to the Hare Krishna movement. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami sat under this tree and chanted. So, but they were still contained. They were like in the park, and then they got 26 2nd Avenue, a small storefront, much smaller than this room. So the real Harinams actually began on the West Coast, when Vishnujanand and Tamal Krishna, Jamuna, and others actually went out on the streets, moving through the streets, chanting the holy name. And then he sent his disciples, which I was one of those persons, 6 adults and 1 small baby, 6 weeks old, sent us to London. And then we really became, that was another thing, the name was International Society for Krishna Consciousness, but there was like one, they didn't even have 26 2nd Avenue at that point, Then they got the little storefront. Then we got San Francisco, so we expanded from east to west. But International Society, it seemed like kind of a presumptuous name. But then we got a temple in Montreal, Canada, so then that we built, and that was international. Although some people consider Canada an extension of America, but the Canadians definitely don't think that way. So when we went to London, then it really became International Society. And during that time in London, then we made a record. Nowadays, maybe the older people will know, younger people, a record. What's that, But it was like a vinyl disc where you put it on a machine that went in a circle, and there was a little arm with a needle on it, and music would come out. So we made a record, a big one. It's called an LP, means long play. And then from that LP, we made a smaller record, which was the Hare Krishna Mahamantra on one side and Govinda Jai Jai on the other. But because George Harrison was promoting this and backing us, that record it became internationally known. So suddenly, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra was really, literally all over the world. USA, Czechoslovakia, Britain, Sweden, Germany, Japan, Australia, South Africa, Yugoslavia, it was just like going all over the world. And that had actually been our goal, that we felt like, actually it was Shamsundar's idea that, it says in the Bhagavad Gita that whatever the great person does, a great soul, the common man will follow. We see this in daily life. Some famous idiot, everybody wants to dress like them, talk like them, So we were considering if we can get the Beatles, because at that point they were wildly famous all over the world. It was said, ironically, they were more famous than Jesus. Because they would go to these huge stadiums, thousands and thousands of people, and it would sell out, and they'd have to turn people away. You go to church and it's all empty inside, so it wasn't really, it was a statement that had some validity to it on a certain level. So if these famous people, young men, people of our time, representing our culture, if they chanted Hare Krishna, then that would invoke in others to follow, to do the same thing. And that's exactly what happened when this little record came out. And George would sometimes tour with us, because when you make the record, then you have to go around and promote it. So we were being invited to this country and that country, this venue, that venue, and chanting and inviting others to chant with us. And George would sometimes come with us, so that made an impact. And in this way, very quickly, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra was becoming literally a household word. And all of this, we didn't even have our own place at this point. Srila Prabhupada formally initiated almost 5,000 disciples. And this represented a wide diversity of different nationalities, races, ethnicities, and religious backgrounds. It wasn't just limited to a particular class of society or a particular ethnic background. It was just a little about 4,000, trying to remember the exact four. Anyways, it was in 4,700 and some odd, something like that. And people from Africa. He'd sent disciples to Africa. Last year I went to one of those countries, Ghana. And Ghana, in Africa you have South Africa, so it's quite developed. They just had a fantastic 4-day Rath Yatra festival there where millions of people came. I saw a picture of the kitchen they set up. It was in a football field, and they had stove after stove after stove. I couldn't count them all. Big, huge woks on fires. Carol, I guess they're using LPG fires. And they were churning out hundreds of thousands of plates, feeding. Their goal was 200,000 plates a day. So you can imagine how, what teamwork, what cooperation to get that pulled off, and all the permits, and really fantastic. So, but then there was the other side of Africa, where the native Africans were. The natives, a lot of the people in South Africa were immigrated from other countries. But in other parts in Kenya and other parts where he went, the native Africans, so then Prabhupada was very particular in sending his disciples, to preach to the natives. And of course, sometimes it was a little funny because they had their particular ways. And in one place where he went, they hung his clothes out to dry, and when they came to get the clothes, they had disappeared. And and they only found out right before a big evening program, it was like a big sponsored program, and hundreds of people were coming. Prabhupada had no clothes. So they had to, his own students had to give their clothes to him because, he had to have some clothes. So he was speaking, and then he looks and he turns to Brahma and he said, "Brahmananda, look at those boys down there. They have on my clothes." So many things he had to put up with. He established 108 Krishna temples in 6 continents. And he installed the deity of Krishna in most centers are Gauri Thai, and he trained his disciples in the art of deity worship. Now, most of you coming from an Indian background, might not fully understand the culture of deity worship, but you're used to seeing figures of Radha and Krishna or somebody. I'll say somebody because I know that's how it is. We kind of joke sometimes. We'll go to some Hindu temple with all the gods are there. But Srila Prabhupada was not promoting Hinduism. He was promoting the worship of Sri Sri Radha Krishna and Gauri Thai. And he was very particular. This wasn't going to be some hodgepodge thing that, you did when you felt like it, the way you felt like, but following strictly the rules of Arjuna. And that was very revolutionary. Just imagine in 1967, in April, that was the first deities came, and they were, do you know who they were? Lord Jagannath, Subhadra, Baladev. So, for us, already by that point, you know, we had grown so affectionate to Srila Prabhupada that whatever he was presenting, we were immediately accepting it. You know, but if you step back and you look at the beautiful figures of Lord Jagannath, Subhadra, and Baladev, and you have no contact at all with Asian culture, you're just like a regular Joe American, you know, and somebody's saying, there's God and his brother and sister, you know, it can be kind of startling. But we had full faith and conviction in Srila Prabhupada's explanation about Lord Jagannath, and it revolutionized our lives, having the presence. We would go out in the streets and we'd tell them, do you want to see God? And people say, yeah, okay, well, come to our temple because he's there. You know, do you want to see God? And we were, you know, it wasn't a gimmick. We were genuine. Do you want to see God? Just come to our temple. He's there. And we were feeling it so strongly, his presence. So during one part, he was establishing these centers. And in 1 year, between 1970 and 71, there were 32 new centers opened. That's approximately 3 a month. It was just, you know, devotees were on fire. We were feeling such bliss to come in contact with Srila Prabhupada and his message of Lord Chaitanya that we really wanted to share it. And he was telling us from day one, he was telling us, go out and preach. And we were thinking, wow, what are we going to say? And he said, you just listen to what I say, and then you repeat it. Don't add or subtract. So he was just taking this raw merchandise, these raw recruits, and immediately implanting into our minds and our consciousness the need to go out and spread Krishna consciousness and the way to do it. He inaugurated the Rath Yatra Festival of Lord Jagannath, and this was still 1967, July 1967, the first Rath Yatra Festival in the West. And he said these must be held in every major city around the world. And in fact, that is exactly what is happening all around the world, these fantastic Rath Yatra festivals. But the first year was just a little flatbed truck with the deities on the back. Second year, 68, we had our first hand-pulled cart. And then it was 3 carts. And now it's just, you know, like they did this ecstatic festival in South Africa, in Durban, you know, hundreds and thousands. I forget the number, but I think it was over 1 million people came. This is the mercy of Mahaprabhu as coming through Srila Prabhupada. He instituted the Brahmacharini ashram, and that was revolutionary because it was previously unheard of in the Vedic culture. But he saw here sincere young women are coming, and they want to practice and study Krishna consciousness. And so he gave us facility. In 1967, he instructed his disciples how to establish an incense business. And this incense business, Spiritual Sky, was within 1 year, actually, or no, within 4 years, it actually was generating an annual income of $1 million. But the whole thing had been, you know, directed in the beginning by Srila Prabhupada. He taught the devotees how to make the incense, how to package it, how to market it, and then they just took off. Unfortunately, at one point they lost the business, but nonetheless, it showed another aspect of Srila Prabhupada's expertise and how everything can be dovetailed and used for Krishna. And that, yeah, even devotees need money to serve Krishna. Like, I'm sure they're not letting you come here for free. you know, so he was giving devotees instructions how to generate income for Krishna. And then he introduced the Sunday Love Feast. And this is a staple of every, Krishna temple, Krishna having the Sunday Feast program, which features, of course, Krishna Prasadam, sanctified food. And through this program, we can say millions and millions of plates of prasadam. Probably billions by now have been distributed, Krishna Prasadam. And then, in the same vein of distributing prasadam, because prasadam is not just about food. Prasadam isn't food. It is food that's not food. It is food that has become sanctified by being prepared for and offered to Krishna. Therefore it becomes prasadam, Krishna's mercy. We don't eat prasadam, we honor prasadam. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, when given Mahaprasad from Jagannath Puri, would put it on a special place, and then he would circumambulate and make his obeisances before honoring it. So Srila Prabhupada, knowing the power of prasadam, he created Govindas, which was actually the world's first chain of vegetarian restaurants. Some have been wildly successful. If you go to Juhu, they just, they started out with this little hole in the wall, and now it's just like this gigantic place that's always packed with eager participants of prasadam addicts. Here in America, of course, in Los Angeles, they have excellent Govindas, in Tucson. And in New York City, it's a Govinda's Dining Club, but it's a lunch program that is run very well by Devi Dasi. So that was again Srila Prabhupada. He spoke daily on the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, and he delivered thousands of formal lectures. And of this, there's 2,200 of them that are recorded and archived. So those are just the ones that made it to the tape, what to speak of all those that weren't recorded. And he conducted many hundreds of informal conversations on the science of Krishna consciousness with disciples, guests, and friends. And there's over 1,300 of these that are recorded and archived. And it would be my suggestion to you that in studying Srila Prabhupada, his life, his history, and his teachings, that you listen carefully to these conversation tapes. Quite often they take the form of a morning walk. But what's very interesting about these conversations is that they're not like when you're delivering a lecture on Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita. It's a particular topic, and usually that is what's being spoken in a more formal manner. The conversations are with generally his leading disciples, the managers, the sannyasis, and they're talking about the philosophy, but in a different way, more in a way of application. And very interesting, very instructive. In one case, there was a conversation, and it had to do with preaching. So people don't want, they're not interested. So Prabhupada said, oh no, first the person objected. People are saying that we're sectarian. Prabhupada said, sectarian? Not sectarian. Who said sectarian? We are not sectarian. And then the person was saying, but, they say, who says? We are not sectarian. And does Krishna anywhere say he is sectarian? Then they were saying how, it's sometimes difficult to distribute the books or just, give the knowledge out. So Prabhupada thought, he said, when I came, nobody wanted these books. Nobody knew about them. But we created our own market. How did that happen? And we've created our own market for distributing these books. So he said, don't think people are going to come up to you and agree with whatever you have to say. You have to preach. He said, you have to preach. You have to convince them. Don't think they're going to come to you and agree. Yes, I believe whatever you say, I accept. You have to convince them, and that is preaching. So he had the very strong mood towards giving out Krishna consciousness and making sure that we, his followers, understood our obligation in giving out Krishna consciousness. He had scores of interviews and philosophical discussions with newspaper reporters and scientists, religious leaders and politicians, as well as meeting with other well-known dignitaries and celebrities, even, people like, of course, the Beatles, Ravi Shankar, etc. And then he himself published, or had recorded, more than 20 albums of devotional music. And this is another thing I would urge you all to do, is to listen very carefully to Srila Prabhupada's kirtans and bhajans. Srila Prabhupada explained this is not about music. This is not about a musical arrangement or a musical experience. These kirtans, these bhajans, they're an offering to the Supreme Lord. They're for His pleasure. And when you hear Srila Prabhupada chanting, it's very deep. Quite often, we would chant with him without any instruments except our hands. Just hearing the holy name and going deep into the vibration of the holy name. There's at least 1 or 2 recordings that I've come across just chanting Hare Krishna mantra with our hands. He published the monthly magazine, Back to Godhead, and he called that the backbone of the Hare Krishna movement. And at the height of the circulation, there was over 1 million copies per month being sold. And this is interesting when you realize that we didn't have subscriptions going out. It wasn't like the magazine was printed and things were going out in the mail. This was by young men and women taking these magazines and hitting the pavement, going out in the street. And over 1 million a month were then distributed all over the world. He launched the ISKCON Life Membership Program. Maybe some of you, if you came from India, are familiar with that. And that was really another one of his little, like a spark of genius, because what it did, it exposed people, especially educated people, to Krishna consciousness. It distributed the books, and it got revenue, income, all in one nice little package, which benefited the person being approached and involved. He built major temples, as mentioned, in Bombay and Vrindavan, and of course the beautiful spiritual city in Sridham, Mayapur, where the Temple of Vedic Planetarium is now being constructed. Have any of you been recently to Mayapur? Anyway, this is just a very glorious event, because this Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, it's going to be like our flagship. Just like you can say that the Roman Catholics, they have the Vatican, but we have Mayapur, the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, which is going to be in itself a very complete preaching unit for people to understand the position of the world. And it's not little. It's got enough space for 10,000 people to congregate and chant. And you might think, where are we going to get 10,000 people? But when Sri Sri Panchatattva were installed about 7-8 years ago, we could not fit everybody in the temple. 7,000 people came. We couldn't get everybody in. So this is no stretch of the imagination to build some, because some devotees are thinking, why so big? I mean, it's humongous. Why? Because Lord Chaitanya is calling. Come, come, and chant the holy name. And when there's an event like that, people come, thousands of them, because it's so ecstatic. It's